Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children from 2016. This is based on a, at least at the time, recently published book series that was criticized as something of an X-Men ripoff. I suppose it was to my advantage that I knew nothing of the book and went into this movie cold, having no expectations. The exposition, though, does go on, and I guess that might be frustrating if you were a fan of the book and impatiently waiting to see your favorite kid in action. Although everyone on the team does get a turn at bat, the children are rarely anything more than background. I enjoyed what I saw, but I could see how someone might have had higher expectations. The 3D, though, is a fantastic experience, comparable to one of the better Marvel 3D conversions. However, unlike Marvel, the 3D here felt a bit... Now, how do I say this without making it sound like I'm complaining? Because I'm not. The 3D was a bit overstated at many times. Though there are terrific CGI splashes, thrills, and delights, a large chunk of the movie was not in the context of a thrill ride roller coaster, but as a drama about, well, peculiar things. And in many of these thoughtful, exposition-laden scenes, the 3D was dialed right up. There were moments that were just two people talking, and one of them is clearly well outside the screen. To steal a line from the perhaps former 3D reviewer L.J. Draco, it's a true 50-50 experience, coming out as much as it was going in. In a boring movie, a grand 3D treatment can keep me interested even if the script is losing me. But I didn't find this movie boring at all. I, in fact, feel it's one of Tim Burton's better movies from the last 20 years. To that end, the 3D almost felt invasive, as I found my enjoyment of this 3D conversion often distracted me from the script. Take this moment where we listen in on young Jake, the main character, and his grandfather. It feels like there's a football field between them. I imagine they'd have to shout at each other to hear across the room, "Grandpa, speak up." Fun to see, but it did add a flavor of overall oddness, somewhat reminiscent of watching a homebrew 3D conversion, which tend to impress in function, but are about as artful as a dancing seal. Still, this movie is about oddness, so the feeling perhaps is not that unwelcome. There are some neat details in the 3D conversion itself when we compare it with the original movie. Notice how they darkened the zipper on the jacket on the right-hand side, and in this other shot, darken the highlights on the theater seats. Now, high contrast can confuse depth perception, so perhaps it was competing for attention. Notice here that most of the smoke from the original is left in, but they add some extra wisps just above the bowl of the pipe. I wonder, is that to cover up imperfections, or is it just to make the moment extra fun? In this moment, they do just the opposite and obscure the smoke as much as possible. It's actually a bit garishly done. I almost feel like I owe an apology to some of my criticisms of iPop releases. Here's a more effective use of laziness. Here, instead of separating out the door, they just cut the entire background in half and stretch it over. I guess if it gets the job done, why waste time on minutia? There are also some interesting crop marks on the vegetation in various scenes, some odd rearranging on the leaves and such. I can understand here in the foreground the tree needing to be cropped, but I couldn't quite understand why the tree in the back needed some treatment. And although the crop line in the grass is fascinating on this moment, look also at the tree in the upper left getting cut down. In this moment, they didn't separate the curtain and just kind of stretched it around that lamp, and then they let Miss Peregrine just sort of become part of the tapestry. Now compare that to this wonderful moment where they maintain the slight transparency of the window curtain and give us a distant landscape outside the window. Now I wonder if that curtain was in front of a green screen originally. Maybe that's why they were able to add depth here, but not in the former shot. Here, they really rearranged some of the steel, if you look a little to the right. And if you can notice it between the actors, they really mushed up the snow on the path. That's really strange. Now, just as an aside to do with the story, much of this movie is about hiding, and the wider world is something of a big, scary place. So it had this expectation of a confrontation out in that big world at some point. And when that time came, despite having some terrific CGI, it somehow made that outside world feel even smaller than the place they were hiding in, even more contained. And this, I found, was reflected in the 3D toward the end. The stereo, it felt underwhelming in some of the biggest CGI moments, like the big skeleton homage to Harryhausen. I wondered why. Was it an illusion? Was the stereo set at max for so long that it had nowhere to go by the end? Or maybe these big, busy moments used more grand, wide shots to show big, wide action. And, well, it's typical for wide shots to have less stereo to preserve the feeling of wide. Or perhaps they chose to dial down the 3D to make the fast action easier to see. Was it more difficult to process? I don't know. Or maybe there wasn't a lot of contrast in color. It did take place in the snow, so maybe the 3D just got buried in with the cinematography. Again, I don't know. Yet, in the midst of all this chaos, we do get terrific 3D examples like this hand freezing in the water, giving us a fascinating 3D moment. I love window shots, and this is just like a window shot. But the window takes on a life. The view changes from wobbly to frosted glass. Just a lot of fun. And check out this shot where we track Jake walking out a beautifully cropped, torn screen door. The task of separating out the screen is impressive in and of itself, but notice how they took the original image and essentially realigned the point of view to something like a sharpened pencil. It all naturally comes to a point just outside the door. The perspective in the entire walking, tracking shot is now focused and pulling toward that moment. And that wasn't in the original image. See also here how they take the first row of kids and not just make them bigger, but in a similar fashion, actually change the composition of the shot. Now, it doesn't break anything in the story, but it is a different look. This leads into one of my favorite moments where we witness a World War II bombing. What is special here is how they slow the action to a still frame, surrounded by these wonderful water drops. Boy, what a fun stereo experience. The scene reminded me of the opening to Pan to a certain extent, another enjoyable 3D experience. Now, Miss Peregrine is somewhat comparable to Pan in another way, where a group of children are hiding away in a kind of Neverland. Though here, the hiding place is a time loop, perhaps more comparable to the movie Groundhog Day. I found that use of a repeating day, not as a trap, but as a hiding spot, I found that it rang a little more true to life than either Neverland or even Groundhog Day, in that life can often seem stuck on repeat, with every day feeling the same. Perhaps it might be agonizing, perhaps it might even be comforting, but it does have a way of feeling permanent, only to then one day change in a moment, and you find yourself in another world, another season that itself will also come to feel inescapable and repeating, until one day it too comes to an end and that larger cycle just sort of repeats all throughout life. And if you're fortunate enough to be able to look back on it all, you may realize all these little loops that seemed indestructible in their time were actually quite fragile.